What if the very people meant to protect you were the ones enabling your killers? In a shocking twist that has stunned the nation, Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, is now facing explosive allegations from none other than Plateau State Governor Caleb Mutfwang, who claims the Nigerian army stood idly by as 27 innocent villagers were butchered just 200 meters from a military checkpoint. This wasn't a rogue ambush. It was a well-coordinated massacre. And what's more disturbing, it happened inside a church. Families burned alive, mothers and children executed. And the soldiers? Silent, unmoved, absent, or worse, complicit. Is Nigeria's military protecting citizens or partnering with the killers? Governor Mutfwang calls it genocide. Activists are calling it treason. International bodies remain silent. And critics are now asking, why is Simon Ekpa being detained in Finland for speaking up, while mass murderers in uniforms walk free in Nigeria? This is not just a local scandal, it's a global alarm. If you're ready to hear the truth, the mainstream media is too afraid to say, hit the subscribe button. Because once you see what's really happening behind Nigeria's front lines, you can never unsee it. The Nigerian Chief of Defense Staff General Christopher Musa has been implicated after Plateau State Governor Caleb Mutfwang exposed Nigerian Army's alleged involvement in a massacre that claimed 27 lives near a military checkpoint. The attack happened just 200 meters from a military checkpoint, yet the army reportedly did nothing to intervene, raising suspicions of complicity or deliberate inaction. The massacre, carried out by suspected Fulani herdsmen, left homes burned, farmlands destroyed, and entire families killed, with the worst carnage occurring inside a church where villagers took refuge. The Plateau state government officially expressed frustration, saying the army failed to respond despite their strategic location and called for immediate investigations and arrests. However, Nigerian newspapers used the term alleged to describe the government's accusation, which many analysts criticized, insisting the massacre was confirmed, not speculative. The Commissioner of Information, Joyce Ramnap, stated that while some attackers were repelled by local resistance, another group infiltrated the village and killed many at the church. Governor Caleb Mutfwang described the attacks as genocide aimed at displacing indigenous communities in Plateau State, noting the scale and frequency of such violence. He accused the Nigerian military of aiding and arming terrorists, claiming the weapons used, like AK-47s and RPGs, could only have come from military sources. International bodies like the UN, USA and UK were criticized for remaining silent, with emphasis placed on Finland due to their detainment of Simon Ekpa, who allegedly works to prevent such atrocities in Biafra land. Meanwhile, a critic has called for the immediate release of Nnamdi Kanu and Simon Ekpa, stating that the real terrorists are the Nigerian government and the Nigerian military. He concluded with a passionate call for global awareness, insisting the Nigerian military is a terrorist organization shielding Fulani militias and that the world must recognize and stop the ongoing atrocities. In every society, one of the most fundamental roles of the government is to ensure the safety and security of its people. The military, often considered the last line of defense, is expected to embody the highest principles of patriotism, integrity, and discipline. But when that very institution is accused of enabling violence or turning a blind eye while citizens are butchered, it shakes the very foundation of public trust. Such is the unfolding tragedy that was recently brought to light in Nigeria, when Plateau State Governor Caleb Mutfwang publicly accused the Nigerian army, under the leadership of Chief of Defense Staff General Christopher Bin Musa, of complicity in a gruesome massacre that took place just steps away from a military checkpoint. The story is not just a local outrage, it's a national and international concern. It is a tale of betrayal, silence, and deadly politics that's now raising alarm far beyond the borders of Nigeria. To understand what exactly happened, we must first identify the heart of the problem. The central issue is the alleged involvement, or, at the very least, suspicious inaction, of the Nigerian military during a violent attack carried out by suspected Fulani herdsmen in a village in Plateau State. The massacre, which claimed the lives of 27 people, occurred within a shocking proximity of a military checkpoint just 200 meters away. Despite the clear presence of uniformed soldiers in such a strategic location, they reportedly did nothing to stop the attackers. This immediately raised troubling questions. How could such carnage occur so close to a military presence without intervention? Was this a case of gross negligence or something far more sinister? According to eyewitness accounts and statements from Plateau State officials, the attackers did not simply stage a hit-and-run raid. They arrived in multiple groups. While some of the attackers were confronted and repelled by local villagers and community defenders, another faction circled around and descended upon a church where dozens of villagers, including women and children, had sought refuge. There, the massacre took its most horrifying shape. Whole families were slaughtered inside the sacred building. Children screamed, mothers cried, blood spilled across pews and altars. It was not just a killing, it was a message. And the silence of the nearby soldiers only intensified the trauma. Governor Caleb Mutfwang did not mince words. In a press conference that has since sent shockwaves throughout Nigeria and abroad, he described the attack as a genocide. For him, this was not an isolated incident or a random act of banditry. It was part of a deliberate, systematic attempt to displace the indigenous communities of Plateau State, especially the Christian farming populations. The governor pointed out that these types of attacks have grown disturbingly frequent and follow a similar pattern each time. He alleged that well-coordinated militias, heavily armed and organized, strike vulnerable communities while the military either looks away or arrives too late, sometimes even hours after the smoke has cleared and the dead have been buried. Governor Mutfwang's accusations were not speculative. His Commissioner of Information, Joyce Ramnap, backed his statements with disturbing details. She described how local defenders attempted to resist the first wave of attackers, but were eventually overwhelmed by a secondary wave that found another route into the village. This second group inflicted most of the damage, burning homes, razing farms, and carrying out executions inside the village church. What made the event more troubling was that the community had warned of possible attacks beforehand, and yet no preventive measures were put in place. If anything, the military's lack of response suggested either gross incompetence or willful negligence. But it didn't stop there. Caleb Mutfwang went further to accuse the Nigerian army of not just ignoring the attack, but possibly aiding the attackers. According to the governor, the weapons used by the militias, high-powered rifles like AK-47s, rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, and other sophisticated arms, could not have been acquired without military support or connections. These were not weapons one could simply buy from a local market. They were military-grade. His conclusion was chilling. Elements within the Nigerian military were not just failing to stop terrorism, they were enabling it. This kind of accusation carries serious consequences. The Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, is the highest-ranking military officer in Nigeria. To have his name publicly associated with such allegations strikes at the credibility of the entire armed forces. In any functional democracy, such a claim would prompt immediate investigations, resignations, and perhaps even criminal trials. But in Nigeria, the reaction has been muted. National newspapers, likely under pressure, chose to describe the government statement as an allegation, softening the language and leaving room for doubt. That choice of word, alleged, has been widely criticized by civil society groups, journalists, and even international observers who argue that there is nothing alleged about the massacre itself. It happened. The bodies were counted. The church was drenched in blood. The only thing left to investigate is the role of the military. International silence has only added fuel to the fire. Governor Caleb Mutfwang, along with many Nigerian activists and analysts, expressed deep frustration with the lack of global response. No official statements have come from the United Nations, the United States, or the United Kingdom, despite their repeated commitments to global human rights and peacekeeping. Interestingly, the loudest voices of criticism weren't directed at Washington or London, but at Helsinki, Finland. Why? Because Finland is currently holding Simon Ekpa, a controversial but influential Biafran separatist activist, under legal pressure. Ekpa, though polarizing in Nigerian media, has been vocal in denouncing massacres like the one in Plateau, and has advocated for the protection of communities in the southeast. His supporters argue that while he is detained in Europe for political activism, real terrorists are walking free and possibly being protected by the Nigerian military. A growing number of Nigerians, particularly from regions that have suffered repeated attacks, are now calling for the immediate release of both Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu, the detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, ipob. The argument they present is simple. Men like Kanu and Ekpa may be controversial, but they have never orchestrated a massacre. Meanwhile, armed herdsmen, often identified as Fulani militias, have left a trail of death from Benue to Plateau to Kaduna, and yet they continue to operate with impunity. Many critics say the Nigerian government is not only failing to address the real problem, but actively suppressing those who speak out against it. One particularly passionate critic, whose identity remains undisclosed, issued a viral statement that has since captured the attention of many Nigerians and diaspora communities. He didn't hold back. In his words, the Nigerian military is now a terrorist organization. A group that shields Fulani militias, provides them with arms, and obstructs justice for their victims. He called on the international community to stop pretending not to see what is happening and to finally hold the Nigerian government accountable. The consequences of these events are already being felt. Trust in the military has hit rock bottom in several regions. Villagers are now organizing themselves into local militias, community defense groups, and vigilante outfits. But this is a dangerous road. When citizens no longer trust their military or police, they take up arms to protect themselves. This could lead to even more violence, breakdown of law and order, and the emergence of warlord-type governance in rural areas. Nigeria is already battling secessionist threats, religious tensions, banditry, and economic hardship. This new wave of distrust against the military could escalate everything tenfold. Solutions are not impossible, but they require courage. First, there must be an independent international investigation into the Plateau massacre and other similar incidents. This investigation must be transparent, free from government interference, and allow for witness protection. Second, The military must be forced to undergo serious reform. This means purging corrupt officers, investigating arms flows, and reorienting the forces towards true civilian protection. Third, there needs to be a revival of local governance and civilian oversight, so that communities can report threats and receive actual protection, not just empty promises. Furthermore, international pressure must be applied. Silence is complicity. The UN, EU, AU, and major governments must call out the Nigerian government if it continues to ignore atrocities. Sanctions may be necessary, not just blanket sanctions, but targeted ones against individuals found to have funded, enabled, or protected terrorist acts. This could include military officials, political figures, and arms suppliers. But how far are we from any of these solutions? The truth is, sadly, not very close. Nigeria is a nation where institutional rot runs deep. Corruption, nepotism, and political interference have hollowed out most of its democratic structures. Whistleblowers are punished. Journalists are threatened. Activists are imprisoned. If there is going to be change, it will likely come not from the top down, but from the ground up, from the people. And for that to happen, stories like this one must continue to be told, retold, and amplified. At the end of the day, the names may change, the locations may vary, but the pain is the same. Mothers in Plateau are no different from mothers in Zamfara or Anambra. The sound of gunfire doesn't change from village to village. The fear of seeing your home torched and your family slain is a universal agony. Whether it's Governor Caleb Mutfwang sounding the alarm, or a man like Simon Ekpa crying out from a cell in Finland, or General Christopher Musa standing silently at the top of the military hierarchy, the questions remain. Who is protecting the Nigerian people, and who is enabling their killers? Until those questions are answered honestly, justice will remain a distant dream, and the blood of innocents will continue to stain the soil of a once hopeful nation. As the news continued to ripple through national and international circles, the story took on deeper complexity, unraveling not only the brutality of the event, but also exposing the fragile architecture of power, politics, and ethnicity in Nigeria. Governor Caleb Mutfwang's courageous stand against the Nigerian military's alleged complicity was more than just a local complaint. It was a rare act of defiance from a sitting state governor, openly challenging the military establishment and perhaps unknowingly drawing the battle line in a national confrontation between silence and truth. Across the homes of grieving families in Plateau State, the pain was more than physical. It was spiritual, mental, generational. Survivors whispered in agony, asking how 27 lives, including children and elders, could be wiped out while a military checkpoint stood just a stone's throw away. Some questioned if their lives mattered at all to the state. Churches, once seen as sanctuaries in moments of danger, had turned into slaughterhouses. One woman, who barely escaped the carnage with a bullet wound in her thigh, sobbed as she told local journalists that she saw her husband and 2 sons gunned down beside the church altar, right after they knelt to pray for deliverance. Inside the same village, ash still covered the burnt remains of what used to be homes. Farmlands lay charred, and goats and chickens, those that survived, roamed aimlessly over scorched earth. Local leaders wept as they toured what was left of their community. It wasn't just an attack, it was erasure. Meanwhile, at the state government house in Jos, Governor Caleb Mutfwang doubled down on his claims. He said this was not the first time Plateau State had seen such betrayal. For over 2 decades, he explained, Plateau had witnessed the same pattern: suspiciously timed attacks, lack of arrests, quick denial by authorities, and the quiet burial of victims. He told reporters that if this pattern was not broken, then Plateau, like other parts of Nigeria, would soon fall into complete lawlessness. He also disclosed that preliminary evidence was being compiled with the help of surviving eyewitnesses and whistleblowers to document the army's non-responsiveness and possible complicity. To fully grasp the scale of the allegations, one has to consider the significance of the person accused, General Christopher Musa. As Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, he is not only the top-ranking military official in the country, but also the face of Nigeria's counter-terrorism efforts. For years, General Musa had been praised by some for leading anti-terror campaigns, especially against Boko Haram in the northeast. But critics have long warned that such praise overlooked how uneven military operations had become in other regions, particularly in the Middle Belt and southeast. Some whispered that the army's silence or failure to intervene in these areas had ethnic undertones. Now, with Governor Caleb naming him indirectly and linking the military to terrorism, those whispers have turned into loud, angry cries. Within hours of the governor's revelations, the Nigerian Ministry of Defense released a short statement denying any wrongdoing. They insisted the soldiers stationed at the checkpoint near the attacked village followed protocol, and blamed the lack of response on logistical constraints and communication breakdowns. But this explanation did little to pacify a population already skeptical of such narratives. Even more shocking, the statement made no mention of any arrests, no reassignment of soldiers from the checkpoint, and certainly no indication that anyone in command was being held accountable. On social media platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook, Nigerians exploded with anger. Hashtags like #Plateau Massacre, #Mutfwang Speaks Truth, and #Musa Must Go began trending. Influencers, activists, religious leaders, and even former politicians began calling for a full-scale investigation into military operations across Nigeria. Some started drawing parallels between the killings in Plateau and those that had occurred in southern Kaduna, Benue, and parts of Nasarawa over the years. Many posts asked the same painful question: why is it that in almost every major massacre involving Fulani herdsmen, the Nigerian military is either absent, late, or passive? One viral video showed a local pastor breaking down in tears during a church service. He shouted, "God, where are you? How long shall our people die while the army watches? Is the blood of a northern Christian worth less than that of others?" The congregation cried with him. These were not just emotional outbursts, they were expressions of deep, long-standing grievances that had never found an outlet until now. As days passed, human rights organizations in Nigeria began collecting testimonies from survivors. The Civil Rights Agenda Group, CRAG, a Jos-based NGO, published a preliminary report suggesting that the attackers used military-grade communication equipment, coordinated their assault in waves, and appeared to have full knowledge of the village layout. This was a tactical military-style operation, their spokesperson said. It was not random. It was well planned and well executed. CRAG demanded an international tribunal into what they called military-facilitated ethnic cleansing. Outside Nigeria, the international community appeared divided. While Finnish activists who supported Biafra immediately condemned the killings and linked the Nigerian army to what they called state-sponsored terrorism, most Western governments remained disturbingly quiet. The United Nations issued a brief statement expressing concern, but avoided any language that suggested government involvement. The United States Embassy in Abuja released a one-paragraph press release offering condolences, but did not call for any investigation. In London, UK lawmakers sympathetic to Christian communities in Nigeria raised the issue in Parliament, but their calls were drowned by more pressing global conflicts. Ironically, the sharpest international reaction came from Nigerian citizens living in diaspora. In cities like Toronto, Berlin, Dallas and Dublin, candlelight vigils were held for the victims of the Plateau Massacre. Some Nigerians abroad marched with signs that read, "Musa must resign," "Army hands off massacres," and "Release Kanu and Ekpa, jail the real terrorists." These vigils were peaceful but passionate, reflecting a growing global network of Nigerians who feel the country is being destroyed from within and ignored from without. Amid all this, a new question emerged. Was Nigeria sitting on the edge of a civil crisis? The combination of failed military response, alleged army collusion, ethnic and religious tensions, and political silence is a volatile mix. Many political scientists warn that unless urgent steps were taken, more communities would take up arms. In places like Zamfara, Niger, and parts of the southeast, community militias are already replacing the government as the first line of defense. Some of these groups are backed by local elders, others are radical and unpredictable. The fear is that a fragmented Nigeria, where each village defends itself, is one step away from an uncontrollable civil war. The people of Plateau are not asking for sympathy. They are demanding justice, and the world, whether it is ready or not, must listen. This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.